Okay, good morning. We are kind of moving on past the intro, which was learning Node. And as we learned in the first couple of days of this class, Node is known as a runtime environment, basically to run JavaScript on a server, right? And so you can kind of run JavaScript outside of a browser. And we did some labs where we're utilizing Node um, and to run JavaScript and solve some basic problems. Um, we're moving on to talk about a package called Express today, and we'll dive into that. But before we dive into Express, in order to use Express, we have to learn this tool called NPM. So I'm going to break up this lecture into at least two parts. Part one being understanding NPM. Node Package Manager. And so um, now, um, NPM used to, and I'll refer to it as Node Package Manager, but my understanding is it doesn't necessarily stand for Node Package Manager anymore. It's just a tool called NPM. However, I still think of it Node Package Manager. So if you kind of just uh, you know, look up npm.js, there you find the website. So if you think about the, the words node, package, manager, well, you have to understand what node is. It's, a runtime environment for JavaScript. Packages are um, JavaScript files that other developers have written. And this is really great because it allows us to not reinvent the wheel. And so good packages kind of rise to the top, and popular packages, are going to be fast and they're going to be mostly secure. And, popular packages, they get updated often and they have teams that work on them and they get funded, to pay for the teams of developers. Um, and so packages are what you might call a dependency, um, and that's great because it's going to allow us to build things really fast. We don't have to reinvent the wheel to build a web application with JavaScript. And so on inside ranking, you can kind of find, if you scroll down, you can find my Express lecture outline. This is going to be kind of what I'm referencing here. Um, and I'll pull this off of the screen. You can also find, oh, besides my lecture outline, you can find some links and a link for Learn Express. So anyways, definitely for the lecture outline, that's what I'm going to be referencing as I go through here. And then the Learn Express document, you can kind of see here, is 43 pages. Um, this is something that, this is the reading, right? We don't have a textbook, but we do have, essentially reading that really does a deep dive into Express. And of course, the recommendation is to use this in conjunction with this lecture to help you learn. Um, and so there's the couple of links there. And if you're looking at the lecture outline, you're going to see there's actually three parts of NPM. You see the website, the registry, and the client. So of course we're starting on the website, and I'm going to recommend that you bookmark this kind of off the top. I'll go ahead and add a new folder in my Rankin. So I've got a Rankin folder, so I'll add a folder, and I'm just going to call this MERN resources kind of thing. So this is the MERN stack, and I'm going to put this as a subfolder into Rankin right here. Drop it onto my MERN resources. Hopefully I didn't nest it one too deep there. I think I might have. Get out of there. Go right there. And so now we've got our MERN resources, and as I accidentally click on something, close that. Let's add this to favorites and add this to MERN resources. So, just a website that you want to bookmark, and we're going to be doing a little bit of digging, looking at this first part of NPM, the website. Um, you know, it's interesting to kind of keep yourself up to date on popular NPM packages. And so, of course, um, all of these packages are tools that other developers have built. And some of these we will be incorporating. Um, Next.js isn't hard once we learn some React to build on top of React with Next. And so that would definitely be something we can bring into this class. Um, MongoDB will be bringing in, React Router will be bringing in. So we bring in a lot of these. We bring in Lodash. Um, and so these are just popular packages. These have um, lots of downloads on a regular basis. And so the package that you can kind of start with, since we're ultimately going to be installing Express today, is if you kind of search up Express, um, it brings you to the the landing page for Express. Now, it's interesting. The landing page you're going to notice is this is the README file. So as we generated yesterday our GitHub repo, and we clicked the checkbox to add the README, this README is what users will see if you ever write a package and publish it to NPM's website. This is what the user sees. The user sees what's in the README. Um, so that's just kind of the first thing, and then you can kind of see some code. You see this tab has dependencies. So Express, as we get into it, is dependent on 31 other JavaScript packages. And so that's something to keep in mind, that um, every package that you depend on, if you depend on one other package, well, that developer changes their code, and uh, you know, basically, I view it as uh, every package that you depend on is kind of like a window of opportunity for a hacker to get in, right? So if you're depending on a good library that's secure, then it's going to be hard to get through that window. Call it like a bulletproof window. But if you're dependent on a um, package that's not secure, then that might be a weak window that would be easier for a hacker to get in. So the reason I'm just mentioning this is like, hey, this has 31 dependencies. I view that as 31 windows that I'm opening up my application um, to essentially, quote unquote, get hacked. Now, Express is crazy popular. If you look at the weekly downloads, um, 28 million weekly downloads. So it's safe to say that Express is mostly secure. Nothing is 100% secure. But you're going to notice right here that Express has 114 known issues that it needs to fix. And so Express is not perfect, right? It has some bugs, it has some issues. You can see there's actually 55 pull requests. That means that there's 55 developers suggesting changes to the code base to try and patch it, fix it, etc. So there's a bunch of people kind of recommending suggestions improve um, to improve Express. The license is MIT. We kind of saw that. Now, it is interesting. This is what I would call a landing page for this package. It's going to give you a lot of basic information, how to install Express. So here's your command to install Express from the command prompt or the terminal. Some features, and then some documentation, quick start, and we'll definitely do we'll definitely walk through this. So, this landing page is something that as we go through our packages, here's another package that we'll add, called nodemon. And you could look at, well, okay, how popular is it? 5 million weekly downloads. You can see it has 10 dependencies. These are really common and popular packages um, that we'll use in this class. You can see last published was 7 months ago. So Express, it's so big, it becomes, once software becomes so big, it's slow to change. So you don't see that it goes through a lot of updates. And then where's my version? Version 4.18.2. That versioning system, um, oh, I believe it's called semantic versioning. Semantic versioning. Okay, yeah. Okay, so it's semantic versioning. And what that is, if I can explain semantic versioning, it's just a good thing to know in this industry. You call it major version, minor version, and then patches. And so major versions, the main thing on this um, the main thing here is that, hey, if I go from version 3 to version 4, this newer version on version 4 would actually break code. There would be breaking changes between versions. So when you have a major version change, the big distinction there is that from version to version, it would actually break code. So the old code that you had written has been updated in such a way that it would no longer function. So you've got major versions, and you've got minor versions, which this is like adding new features. This would be adding new functionality to your app, but it wouldn't necessarily be breaking prior code. It would just be adding new functionality. And then the last one would be your bug fixes. So kind of major version, minor version, and then bug fixes. And that's um, uh, that semantic versioning is the practice. Although I will say it's up to the developers to be to implement those rules. And if you have good developers, they can follow that and keep that true. But there's nothing stopping a developer who's less experienced or making a mistake and implementing a break in a minor version. And so that's the recommended. However, that's not always going to be the case, if that makes sense. Um, so I think we looked at what's important to look on the NPM website. Um, it is typically the case that this landing page doesn't give me all that I want. Um, this is kind of a splash page, if you will. Larger libraries often have their own landing page. Like you're going to notice the homepage here is expressjs.com. And this is going to be where you can get the full documentation on Express. And, you know, oftentimes this is where I end up, with the Express version and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the website. And oftentimes I kind of end up off the website looking at the documentation uh, for the package itself. The next piece that is a part of NPM is called the registry. That's essentially your database where all the code exists. And so if you're going to bring in Express for your application to use, when you download it out of the database or the registry. The registry is really behind the scenes. It's not something you really have to see or touch or interact with. It's just kind of like, hey, this is a big database that's online. Um, by going to the website, you can see what's in the registry, and by um, installing these packages, you basically download files from the registry onto your development computer. Um, and so that is the registry, is essentially a database. And then the third part of NPM is what's considered the client. And the client is the command line tool that you use to run commands, to run NPM commands. So I will kind of build a folder here, and I'll just call it Express Demo, and right click and open this with code. Feel free to follow along should you want, or just watch. Um, and so yes, I trust the authors, and let's close the welcome page. So the client is the command line, the terminal, if you will. So if I go to new terminal, one thing we did yesterday is we ran a command called npm init. You might remember this, and this is essentially settings, or what you might call metadata. Metadata is a fancy word for data about data. You're very familiar with metadata. Like, for example, anytime you take a picture, that photograph is a piece of data, and then you store that on your computer. Well, the metadata about the photograph would be, the time of the day that you took the photo, the date that you took the photo, maybe how many pixels that were that it took to save in the photo. So metadata is data about data. Okay, so this npm init command will be settings and data about your application. And so you go through this. Now there's a hotkey /y, and I'm just going to kind of show you this. If I do npm init y, it basically creates a package.json file. So this is where the metadata is stored. Okay. And this is a JSON file, right? JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Basically, you have a JavaScript object here in curlies, and you can see property : value, separated by commas, property : value, property : value. So this is just a JavaScript object with properties separated by colons and then their values. And so this is a quick way of creating a package.json, and you can fill this in and just make edits. This is all optional, by the way. All this metadata is considered optional. However, you're always going to do it. You can kind of change this to an MIT license. For now, I'm going to delete this script. Actually, I'll leave it there for now. The main file, this is the point of entry. Like when your application starts, what is the name of the file that should run first? And so conventionally, we're going to name that server.js. This is a demo code base for AWD 1111 to learn Express.js and NPM. Hanging in there, Grant? Everything good so far?
Yeah.
Cool. Cool. Feel free to chime in anytime. Otherwise, I'm just going to roll with it. So this is kind of like a default package.json. Personally, I like this approach, just making edits versus the interactive mode, which we did yesterday, where you're filling in one piece at a time in the command prompt. But again, it's all optional. None of these are required, and you can kind of work with it where. This is kind of like your step one that I would recommend anytime you're working with different packages. Um, you want to start with npm init. And so the first command that we did a little bit yesterday, we'll pick a npm install config. And so this is a package, and but it's not really. We'll cover this package in details, but what that package does isn't the important part. What I want to cover is the actual npm command to install. This is a very standard command, npm install config. And you can kind of wait here. You can see added 2 packages. And here, now you can see something new was added to our package.json. It added this called dependencies. Of course, these are our packages that our application depends on, with config, and then these are the versions. And then this caret, we're going to cover what these symbols mean here in a bit. But basically, it says what if you ever want to update your versions of config, like what versions can you update? The major versions? Can you update the minor versions? Or the patches? And so the last word, node, we know what node is, we know what a package is. The last word there that I didn't really cover yet is the manager part. And so what you're doing here is you're managing with npm. You can manage the versions of your dependencies. This is 3.3.9. Well, what happens when config version 4 comes out? Do I want to upgrade my application to use config version 4? Well, you can do that with npm. You could just run a command, and depending on these carets and these different symbols, you're allowed to upgrade major versions and minor versions and patches, and we'll do a little bit deeper dive on that at a later time. Okay. Like the other day when I said, oh, wait a minute, I fat fingered something I didn't want to install, you can uninstall. And so, 2 simple commands to both install and uninstall. We did see the other day too, we could do a /i is, the switch to install. Now, sometimes that works well. Sometimes it didn't seem to work well for me there. And so what I typically do when I install a package so that I know that I'm installing it correct is I am going to go to the NPM site and look at config. And it's typically a pretty straightforward install command. And there it is right there, npm install config. So the /i didn't work for me. And we saw that that worked in some cases, but clearly not all cases. And that's fine. So the install command versus the uninstall command. Another switch that that is out there is called the global. And so it's amazing how many npmjs.com. What is a global switch do for us? Sometimes there are packages that you want installed on the computer versus just for your application. And so when you install a package on the computer, it becomes more of a command line tool that you can run from a command prompt outside of the folder that your application is in. And so when you're installing a package, you're kind of installing it in that folder. and you're using, it's for your software that you're building for that website. Um, nodemon is an example of a tool that you can install with a /g, which makes it a global install, which makes it, again, more available to the computer outside of your um, project. And so you can see the command right there, npm install /g nodemon. And we will use nodemon, npm install /g nodemon. We'll use it today, and we'll use it here in a little bit. So it's a good thing to go ahead and install. And just at a glance, you see here it did install it globally, so you don't even see it in the package.json. Whereas when we were working with config, you did see it go in the package.json. So /g is a switch that now you understand a little bit more about. You know, it is short for global, right? Minus global. So this would do the same command. Of course, -g is just the quick way of doing it. Okay, so you only need to install that once. You don't need to install that twice. It should be good to go now for every project that we work on. Another switch, and by the way, that is a case-sensitive G, so it's a lowercase g. Sometimes a capital G can do something else and have a different effect. So those are case-sensitive. Another tool that or switch that's part of NPM. So we got /g, and actually there's our quick install right there to the right. That doesn't do the global switch, but you can kind of see NPM. And there was my mistake. It's NPM I. It's not switch I. That was my mistake earlier. I bet you if I go back, NPM I config. Yeah, that was a user error. Now you can see it brought config back. NPM uninstall config. Okay. Let me bring it back one more time. I keep installing and uninstalling config. Doesn't really matter. You'll notice the first dependency that you add, one thing I didn't talk about yet, is it brought in this node modules folder. And it also brought in this package lock JSON. The word package lock JSON has the word lock on it. You might infer that that means don't touch, and you would be correct. You shouldn't find yourself making any edits to the package lock.json. Again, this is all dealing with the versions of Node, the versions of your dependencies. It's kind of a file that's there. Don't touch it. You can touch, however, package.json. This is something that's something that you can edit. Back to node modules. Now you can see that there is a config folder and a lib folder. You can see this is the JavaScript that you're now depending on. And so you kind of see a function in here. You're seeing they're exporting things. Kind of the same thing like the package lock. If you find yourself in here wanting to make edits, that's not something that you typically are going to do. So I really kind of leave my hands off of node modules. Sometimes it's good to kind of dig and try and understand the code that you're referencing, but you really don't want to make too many edits typically. Okay. Now, node modules, because it has a lot of source code in it that you're depending on, the file size of this folder can actually be a large, it can grow and grow and grow. It could be a large folder full of files. And so what you'll find when you push to GitHub Like if I were to push this Express demo to GitHub, and um, I should have a git ignore. Um, Kind of going back to what we did yesterday. Let me kind of pull up a git ignore that I made yesterday. Yesterday, you might remember, if I go to your repositories, we did a little lab called Lab 0101, and we have this git ignore. Git ignore is just a file that says, hey, do not push these files or these folders onto GitHub. And so it's like basically it is what it sounds like. Ignore these files, ignore these folders. We selected a template called node. So there was a git ignore template, and we selected node. And so you can kind of see here, it's not going to put our node modules folder on github.com. Because that node modules folder can be big, it's actually better to not copy up all those dependencies. And for example, if you want to clone your repo onto multiple computers, you'll need to reinstall the node modules folder. So check this out. So like if I delete this node modules, okay. See if it lets me do this. Yes, I'm an administrator. Go away. Okay. So, for example, when one of my students pushes their code onto GitHub, I'm going to clone that repo and have their source code on my computer. It's not going to come with the node modules folder. But inside of package.json, it's going to tell me that, hey, my student is depending on, this config. And so I run this command npm install, and it will basically download all the dependencies for me and bring back the node modules folder. Okay, so it's kind of important to understand, like if you're using GitHub and you're pushing and pulling code onto multiple computers, that this is the command npm install by itself to go ahead and download all the dependencies and put them into the node modules folder. Okay. Back to the outline to bring it back in. So we talked about the three parts of NPM. We talked about NPM init. We talked about NPM install. We talked about NPM install G global. Okay, there's one more switch that I want to show, which is this, and I'm going to look up ESLint. Okay, and ESLint is called a linter. It's going to help us during development when we're writing our JavaScript, write better JavaScript. So it says ESLint is a tool for identifying and reporting on patterns found in JavaScript. And so this is just going to help us write clean, good JavaScript. And so here you can see the npm command for installing ESLint. Pretty simple, npm I ESLint. Let's go ahead and run that. npm I ESLint. So now you can see it put it under dependencies. Oh wait, I was trying to teach another switch. I made a mistake. I want to do something different. npm uninstall ESLint. You get the point. Install, uninstall. Let's go ahead. npm install ESLint with our new switch, which is a capital D. This is shorthand for what we actually did the other day, save dev, right? This is a developer dependency. And if I install it with a /d, you're going to see the difference in my package.json, that it installs it under this devDependencies now. Okay, so remember there's a global switch kind of installing it to the machine. Then there's a devDependencies switch. And devDependencies says, hey, I need this package while I'm in development, while I'm writing code, while I'm building the application, but I don't need it in deployment. I don't need it at runtime. And so when I actually go to deploy my application and kind of, get it out live on the internet, that you do not need the dev dependencies. And so this is a linter that's used during development. It's not used. It's not used during runtime when it gets deployed. And so those are the commands. Make it a little note for myself. The shorthand is NPM I, not, I simply forgot that. NPM I for install. And those are the coverage of your NPM commands. There's global, there's development switches, there's installing, there's uninstalling, there's init, there's npm install. And remember, npm install will download all your dependencies. Okay. Next, we'll just kind of scroll through some of the popular packages. ESLint we talked about. Now, I want to get in the habit of actually using a linter in this class. And so installing the ESLint package is kind of the first step. There's another command to run. See here, if I were to install ESLint, we have to run npm init ESLint config, and let's see, configuration. I think this is one command to do both. You can install and configure ESLint. Let me run this command and show the next steps, because not only do you have to install ESLint, you have to configure it. Okay, and so you're going to notice it's kind of an interactive mode. So I pasted npm init ESLint config, and this is the configuration that I was looking for. And so you can kind of see there's 3 levels of syntax. They go from like the least amount of linting, like the least strict to the most strict. And so I'm just going to kind of choose the middle to check syntax and find problems. Then it asks, what type of modules are you going to use? Remember that the JavaScript modules, which are called common JS modules, um, or so here's common JS, and then here's the more modern JavaScript modules. So common JS is, I would say, you know, you're going to see a lot of common JS if you're looking at older um, code, but the newer stuff is all in the ES modules, so JavaScript modules or ES modules. So I'm going to select this top one, JavaScript modules. Import export is what we're going to use in this class. Which framework does your project use? This is the front end framework. Eventually we'll use React, but for right now we're going to choose none of these. Does your project use TypeScript? I'm going to say no. This is going to be run in Node. So I'm going to hit enter here. What format do you want your config file to be in? And I'm going to say JSON. And you're going to see it creates our linting file with those settings put into it. So just putting that out there, that to use these linters, not only do you have to install them, you know, like ESLint, you also have to configure it. And we'll do this, and we'll use this linter as we write our code in this class. Back to the website. Got a lot of we already looked at nodemon, and we installed nodemon. Another popular package is .env. .env is a way of storing variables more globally on the machine. And so your machine has what are called environment variables. And if I dig into my computer, if you're kind of familiar with Windows and operating systems in general, maybe you're familiar with environment variables. Let's see, advanced system settings, and then you click on environment variables. This is basically, if you kind of look here, system variables. These are pieces of data, right, that have a variable name and a value. And so these are environment variables that are more, again, these are kind of for your operating system. And so when we're working in Node, we want to create a way of storing variables at a more of like an operating system level, and that's the point of the .env. It's an environment variable. It's a more global scope than your application. It's more of an operating system operating level scope. So here's .env. We'll use this. Just wanted to kind of demo it here and explain basically its environment variables. And you'll store settings and connection strings and all sorts of things inside of your .env. So if we go back here and install .env, and again what that does is it brings in a .env dependency. So it just brought in all of these JavaScript files that we can now use. Debug. Another package that we will use is called debug. Debug is I think of it like this. So on your computer, on a Windows computer, you have Notepad. And everyone's familiar with Notepad. Right? You got dumb old Notepad. You can write some text, right? And then you got Notepad++. And Notepad++ is an upgraded Notepad. You can see there's a lot more going on with Notepad++. Um, and so developers, just looking at source code kind of quickly, you can open it up in Notepad. It's a little bit better to open it up in Notepad++. Just one example, if you kind of save as, a dummy page. We save a little HTML file, you get color coding, right? So, like, that's one way that Notepad++ is better than Notepad, and there's many ways, but you get, you can highlight code, you can see opening and closing tags, they're associated with one another, and so there's a lot of benefits of using Notepad++ over Notepad. Okay, you can see it's an upgraded Notepad. Why am I talking about Notepad? Well, the debug package is an upgraded console log. And so in JavaScript and everything you did in your first year, you would use the console for troubleshooting and debugging, aka debug, right? And so console.log is a debugging tool. The debug package is an upgraded console.log. And we'll use debug a lot in this class. And so let's go ahead and install debug. Control V to npm install debug. Okay, and that adds it to node modules. Again, just looking, I've got nodemon installed, I've got dotenv, I've got debug. Let's go ahead and look at the last two, which is config. I've already installed npm install config 10 times. Let's install it one more time. Just for some common dependencies, bringing them in. So, okay, there's config, nodemon, dotenv, and I guess I already had it in. Overlooked it. The last one, npm I express. Okay, and express is the main package that we're going to kind of have a whole nother lecture on Express and standing up a web server with Express. But just showing you how to go ahead and bring in Express, and then let's bring in, we already looked at this one, but we can go back to the Express. Here, there's your command, npm install express. Going back to our lecture outline, that's the node lecture outline. A little bit of talk so far today and this week already. This is day 3 about what are called modules. And realize when I use the word module, what a module is a way of reusing a little bit of code. And so we're going to learn how to have separate files. And let's say in file 1 you wrote a function called function A, and you want to bring that function A into a different file. And so modules are the way that you do that. Modules are the way that you share code between JavaScript files. And you would think that that is something that has been around forever, and it's interestingly enough, modules have not been around all that long. It wasn't until the new, ECMAScript 2015 or so that modules really became a thing. So that's just kind of interesting. On the Lecture outline, again, there's two kinds of modules. There's common modules, and then there's what are called ES modules. Common modules have been around since 2015. ES modules are newer, um, and we'll be using the newer ES modules. And by the way, we're doing a free code camp, and in that free code camp, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into modules in both common modules and ES modules to understand how to import and export and what that really means. So that'll be a good exercise for us to do. And I wanted to break this up into a couple different pieces. That was essentially piece one, right? Going over NPM, going over the NPM commands, going through the popular packages, how to set up a package.json, going over the different kinds of dependencies, global dependencies with the /g devDependencies, capital D, giving your package a name, giving it a description, a versioning, numbers. So that's kind of where I want to stop this first one, and pick up in the next lecture, which is a lecture specifically on the express dependency. Any thoughts, questions, comments?
No, not right now. Thanks.
Yep, all good.